science usually drives everything. We're trying to understand whether you want to have people living on Mars, or if you want to develop new, climate, safe kind of green technologies, whatever. Science is really driving it, and then you have the engineering. And engineering is building it, designing it, developing it safely, and then you have the management. And so there's always a natural tension.
Welcome to Unnatural Selection, a show about competition, innovation, and the strategies shaping tomorrow's frontiers. I'm Nick Encina. Each week, we speak with pioneers shaping the future.
This is episode number 3. Today, we leave the planet. Space exploration is a field where there's no margin for error. Failure isn't a setback, it's catastrophic. And yet, the organizations that operate here still have to innovate, take risks, and move into the unknown. That tension between absolute reliability and radical invention is what makes this environment so revealing. In this episode, we look inside NASA to understand how innovation actually survives, inside a system that can't afford to break. We talk about how ideas move, how disagreement is designed into the system, and how leadership shapes the conditions that allow fragile, early ideas to make it through layers of complexity. This conversation adds an important piece to the growing record we're building, showing how human systems evolve when the cost of failure couldn't be higher. Our guest is Dr. Ed Hoffman. Dr. Ed Hoffman is the CEO, Knowledge Strategies, LLC. Knowledge Strategies is engaged in research, education, and consulting services in support of organization performance. Dr. Hoffman is currently a professor at the Columbia University School of Professional Studies, where he researches and leads a course entitled Navigating the Future of Work. His research indicates that intangibles of ideas, conversation, gratitude, and collaboration are critical for organization growth. He serves as strategic advisor for the Project Management Institute, with a focus on supporting organizations around knowledge, learning, and leadership for teams. He retired from a wonderful journey with NASA as a senior executive. At NASA, he was the first NASA Chief Knowledge Officer and founder of the NASA Academy for Program, Project, and Engineering Leadership. Following the Columbia Space Shuttle failure, he led a small team that designed the NASA Strategic Management and Governance approach. He received the NASA Outstanding Leadership Medal in 2010. He has co-authored the book, The Smart Mission, NASA's Lessons for Managing Knowledge, People, and Projects, released by MIT Press, and launched a curriculum sequence on the future of work for Columbia University. Let's go.
Ed, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. It's been a while that we've been talking, so I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, and just for a little context, as you and I were talking about before, we met about 9 years ago, 2016 at a conference. You were at the time Chief Knowledge Officer for NASA. And I just remember there are a few moments in a lifetime where your eyes just open up and you just realize there's a whole world outside that you weren't privy to before. And when you started sharing with me, the conference was an innovation conference. And you started sharing with me like the innovation that happens at NASA, which is me coming from a computer science background, also from stem cells. Innovation and iteration happens either a course of like minutes and hours, or maybe days and years if you're in biotech, but not in the course of decades where you have to kind of envision what the future might look like in 10, 20, 30 years and consider all the possible scenarios that might impact your mission. And so, as we talked about that conversation has been in my mind ever since, and I've been meaning to unpack more of that. And so it's really a pleasure to have you here.
No, I remember the conference specifically. That was just one of the last before I was getting ready to leave NASA, and but I enjoyed that one very much. I think innovation is really one of the core challenges and opportunities in the world today, and particularly around science, around engineering, around technology. And so I remember that fondly, and I've enjoyed some of the podcasts and the writings that you've done. I've been following up on you. So
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, and it's really the reason why I started this podcast in the first place was because it I do believe that for a while now we've been in a state of hyper innovation. And if you think about just kind of like how long it took for electricity to be absorbed by society or the telephone, the television. It took decades.
Yeah.
And there are certain elements of computers, personal computers, the internet, cloud computing, all the way now projecting towards, the GPUs and AI, which has made it so that even being in the field, I feel like I can't breathe without being bombarded by new innovations.
Yeah.
It's not happening yearly anymore. It's happening like on a week by week basis to the point that it's impossible to guess where we're going to be in 6 months.
Yeah.
A- And so, from that perspective, innovation is such a hot topic because a big part of it is corporations. Just how do you cope with it? How do you position yourself to be able to deal with it, absorb what's right, engage with the things that maybe aren't ready yet for prime time, but stay relevant and competitive in a field where almost anything goes.
Yeah.
And
No, totally.
and so from that perspective, I think, I think with your background, obviously you're doing a lot of work ever since NASA. But I'd love to know, just to get started. I'd like to ask this question just to level set across different people, especially for the audience that's listening. They don't necessarily automatically know. So, could you tell me what, in simple terms, what business was NASA in, and what was your role within that business?
Yeah. So NASA in the industry, it's in the aerospace industry. And really what it targets is it uses science, it uses engineering, and it uses typically the management of projects to be able to explore the universe, explore the world, to be able to understand what's going on in terms of science, the environment, certainly climate, the ability to design and develop spacecraft, and the ability for humans eventually to go to other planets and to live on those planets. So basically, NASA is about, I would say, the science, the engineering, the technology, and the management of exploring, understanding the technologies needed for how we live on Earth and how we move into other planets, understand the universe, including Earth as a whole. So it's the science, it's the engineering, it's the technology, and how we as humans make the best use of it.
It's fascinating, and especially when I think about NASA was founded in 1958,
Yeah.
and so it's been around quite some time. And in that time, we have learned so much if through astrophotography and the Hubble Space Telescope, and now the James Webb Space Telescope. And so, has that mission that NASA has had, has it evolved over time as we learn more about the universe, or was it kind of very crystallized early on?
No, I mean, it's, you use the example of James Webb, which is a more recent one, the Hubble Space Telescope, which was, there earlier in my career. These have changed science. They've dramatically
Hmm.
changed the astronomy of what we understand about the planets, the stars, where we came from. There are people who argue, my wife being one of them, that the telescope projects are the most spectacular part of what NASA does. The uh, the robotic missions, because they're using technologies, very complex technologies that are able to look at other planets, look at other stars. The studies in terms of is there life other places always sparks fascination. And so it's literally it changes. You talked about this at the start. Technology changes now so fast, and because of the science and the engineering, it's only going to continue in that kind of a pattern. But the telescopes, the human exploration, the work that NASA does, and really all of these kinds of organizations change the nature of the world because they elevate to new levels that we're jumping off of. Yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting. It hard to tell what comes first. In a way, society evolves, and therefore we create these technologies that allow us to peer deeper and deeper into space.
yeah,
But then as we peer deeper and deeper into space, that also accelerates our own consciousness and our awareness of what's out there and how we fit into that space. And
yeah,
so it's fascinating to see how Hubble Deep Field, how that just blew our minds and opened our eyes to say like, whoa, those are galaxies. And then what James Webb is doing right now and detecting signals from different planets far away, and the components that make them up, and star formation and so on. It's fascinating. So yeah, to me, kind of learning more about that, and the world that NASA is in, has been something that's been, like I said, on my mind since we first met, because I
Yeah.
can't fathom um, what innovation strategy means to an organization that's thinking decades into the future.
Yeah. I think what NASA does well and it captures the attention of people. I'm a believer. So my focus on NASA was really, if you want to call it one area, learning and development, which was huge. And I know from your career, you start doing one thing, you end up in others, projects take you in different directions. But basically, I'm a learning and development guy. How do you learn? How do you develop? How do you work in a team? And how do you build that kind of capacity to do really complex things? When I started, which was in the early 1980s, the world was much slower, and that's really vital. One of the things I think it's hard for anybody who's started working really in even the last 20 years is to understand how accelerated everything is. So when I started, literally, I could start a learning course on systems engineering, on robotics, on human exploration, and once you designed it, that course would likely last for 5 years without anybody touching it. Uh, when I left in 2016, we upgraded a couple of our project management and advanced system project courses. By the time we completed it, it was already dated. And I had people come here and says, this is missing this. I said, yeah, you're gonna have to iteratively learn and adapt. So I think organizations, Nick, come down to really two broad things, which encapsulates everything. One is knowledge,
Mhm.
and knowledge is the know-how, knowledge is the smarts, knowledge is the experience that people have, but it's also the data, it's the digital. Now it's the AI, it's the technology coming together with collective people to be smart. But in addition to that, it's the relationships. And a key word there is trust.
Mhm.
So, as we do things, as we develop new technologies, and with the work you've done, Julian, the question is, we know you can do that, but do we want you to do that? Is that good for humanity? Do we trust you? I never liked a favorite book or favorite movie in all time, but I reread Frankenstein
Yeah.
recently, and I love everything about it. It's written brilliantly. It's exciting. It's got the kind of horror sci-fi epics, but it's basically a human story about curiosity that gets out of control, leading to incredible knowledge before we know how to handle it. And but I think organizations, particularly nowadays, are about these two things. How do we deal with knowledge? How do we target it? How do we get better? We have to. And how do we rely on people, the human element, the ethics, the conversations, the design aspects to make it work effectively? So my emphasis on the future of work, and really what I wrote about in the Smart Mission in terms of my time at NASA, is when you have the human element, people who are making decisions and communicating and engaging, and they're extending technology and knowledge, it keeps moving forward. And if you get one without the other, that's when we're in trouble.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned a lot of things there that kind of I was hoping to ask you about, because one of them is I can only imagine how complex it must be to choose which projects to go after at NASA, and then how to go about in I'm going to come up with a short list, which I'm sure is partially wrong and entirely missing of key components. But the things that I can think of are things like, for example, you're in a spotlight. You're not a startup where you can do things in stealth mode. So when you choose a project, you've got to think of all those things you just said: the ethics, the humanity, the technological challenges, the politics in some cases as well, right? And I'm sure many other things. You also have to consider that NASA operates in environments where failure can be catastrophic. Like bugs just don't do so well in that world. And yet, innovation requires risk taking inherently. like you're learning something new. If you're not doing something in a space that's unknown, you're not really innovating. And so it's just curious to know how the agency balanced the need for reliability with the imperative to innovate in context of all these other variables that we talked about. Like you're also in the spotlight and there are budgets and there are politics and all those things. It almost feels like having being decision paralysis must be so easy in that space.
Yeah. I think that there's so much that goes into this, as you know, but I think one of the things I learned that's really important is having healthy tensions. And so a typical NASA mission, you're going to have science usually drives everything. We're trying to understand whether you want to have people living on Mars or if you want to develop new, climate, safe kind of green technologies, whatever. Science is really driving it. And then you have the engineering, and engineering is building it, designing it, developing it safely. And then you have the management. And so there's always a natural tension. The scientists always, first of all, scientists in general don't like time. They don't like being told you have to figure this out because science takes
Mhm.
time. And they know what they're shooting for, which often is larger than the budget that's available. And then they have to often rely on the engineers who are building, and engineers love to build, they love to design. So you often get the notion of engineers who are looking to design the highest quality, something that really works. You have management that's always panicking about schedule and cost because that's what you have. And I think the best teams I saw, they knew how to argue. They knew how to disagree because no one agreed. Smart people don't agree to things. If I'm ever in a room and everyone's quietly agreeing, then either people don't care or people are afraid to talk. So you have to have that tension where the management in general is setting, this is what we're willing to pay for to do this project. And the science is indicating this is what we can learn from this. And this is kind of how we're going to approach it and test it and communicate it to the world. And the engineering is usually driving this is the quality dynamics of what we need, and we need more. And if it works right with the right people, there's always trade offs, but you have that healthy tension leading to a product, a program that leads to success. Where you have an entity going too much in one direction, if it's too driven by budgeteers and financial people, then you cut costs usually at the loss to the design. You get things maybe that are low cost, but they don't really do what you want. If you have uncontrolled engineering, then you may get something that's great, but you can't afford it over time. So I'm a
Mhm.
believer that people, if you go to my LinkedIn, it says people, people, people.
I've seen that.
Got that because I was asked. I had linked up in on. They had at one of the seminars I attended. They had someone from LinkedIn, and so I showed them. Oh, you got a great thing here, but you don't explain what you do. I said, well, all that's here. So no, no. You have to say in a sentence what you believe. I said, I've had over 30 years at NASA. How do I get brilliant questions? Questions are uh, young woman said, "What is the most important thing to mission success at NASA?" And I said, "Easy. Number one is people. Number two is people. Number three is people." And she said, "That's it. People,
Mhm.
people." I've stuck with that, but I'm a believer that you can do anything. I used to say, "Give me 10 people at NASA randomly, and you could do anything for good or for evil." So you want to be going with the right target. But I think that's it. The other part of the question I often wonder, NASA is part of the government. Government organizations are risk averse. They're supposed to be risk averse. They don't like taking chances. But what I found at NASA, and I think this is true a lot of organizations in government, 90% of the budget goes to industry. And the industry are large organizations. In my day, there were the Boeings, the Lockheeds, BAEs, and you know, Grumman's and all these kind of organizations. But you also have small entrepreneurial startups. SpaceX at one point was a startup,
Mhm.
and they proposed something from you're seen as a crazy guy at the time, Elon Musk. And he got a very small, I forget the small, it was a very small amount for what he was looking to do. And I remember someone saying, "What's he going to do with that?" What he's going to do is a startup, he's going to demonstrate a concept. And if he does it well, he'll get more money. And now he's got one of the largest, organizations in aerospace. So NASA innovates also through not only the healthy tension, but also through being able to rely on industry. And if you use that smart, you can test, you can iterate, you can experiment, and you can balance the risk in a way that works well for everyone. So that's what I saw at NASA.
No, it's fascinating. So one of the things that I did at Perkin-Elmer was start an innovation lab and focus on really kind of like the digital transformation of Perkin-Elmer, which is at the time an 85 or so year old company that was an accumulation of a bunch of devices and tools that they had accumulated. And so the idea was like, how do you transform an organization like that into kind of forward looking digital? And one of the things that I set out to do was I just kind of like looked at the playbook, which was you look way back at Skunkworks and
Yeah,
Lockheed Martin, which you mentioned. And there are, obviously when you look at the list that they came up with and what worked for them, a lot of those are government specific.
yeah,
But you can kind of cherry pick from there and be like, okay, there are some things around the culture, the environment, the psychological safety, the mission orientation, and so many different factors that go into creating a safe environment for ideation and putting mechanisms in place so that you can address the needs of the people that are doing this thinking, whether you're aligning their thinking, so you go through progressions of saying, okay, right now we're just going to think white hat. All our answers, all proposals or answers are yes and no, no's and buts. Eventually, we'll get to black hat, which will be all no's and buts, but we're going to go through a progression, right? And that allows people to align their thinking. It allows people to put ideas out there without the fear of getting rejected right off the bat because
right.
initial ideas are fragile and usually imperfect, and it's very easy to kill them right from the very beginning because you're always going to find faults with them. And so it just really kind of you establish these mechanisms to create an environment where people can feel like you can bring the best out of them in a structured format. Did the teams operate like that at NASA? Were they like kind of innovation labs in and of themselves? How do
Mhm.
you buffer them from all the stuff that's happening around people, like the politics, right? The bureaucracy,
Yeah.
all how do you buffer them from that so they
Well,
can do their best?
one of the things that I think worked, it's different. I spent a large part of my career in Washington at the headquarters office, uh, where you're around the budget and you're around the strategy, you're around the political environment. But I also spent part of my career at the center level. I spent time at Goddard Space Flight Center. I spent time at what's now the Glenn Research Center. Centers are different, and to a large extent, I think centers deliberately protect their talent, their people, to do the engineering, to do the science, to fight for what they need, and to not be distracted by the noise of the politics. So if you're in Washington, you're going to deal with what you were mentioning, and you really need to be effective and good at that. If you're working a mission, if you're working a project, you probably are, for the most part, you have a certain amount of protection to do the work you need to do. So, there's a little bit, about that. I think it comes down to a few things in any kind of product or project. One of the most important things is who are, they call it stakeholder. But again, I call this management. And I would always say when I'm assigned to a mission, learning development, who does this matter to? I would say, who's my sponsor? Who's got the money? Who's going to determine whether it's successful or whether I failed? And in certain times, if I could not find that leader, that person who was driving something, that I thought I was kind of swimming with a dead shark.
Mm.
Because there's a lot of times, in government where people start something, but I'm not really sure how it got started. No one really owns it or cares about it. And you want to avoid those. But if you find something that really matters, then you have that sponsor who's getting you the resources and you know how you can do. I'll give you an example. So I was set up to create what's now the NASA Academy program, project engineering leadership, basically learning development for the individuals and teams working NASA missions. That was shortly after the Challenger space shuttle disaster started up about 1991. And so I was working at that. And then towards the end of my career, the last big startup was 2010. I was asked to be NASA's chief knowledge officer to create more of a focus on knowledge. It's similar, but now it's extended to the larger organization level and different strategies around knowledge. I didn't really know where the request was coming from. I knew there was a report from Congress that it does every year on every agency, end of 2009. These things are like 300 pages, and usually they have things in there that you have to respond to. And it was shown to me, and it was a report about a page. NASA needs to do a better job of managing its knowledge, sharing its knowledge, getting its knowledge out there. And I knew exactly kind of generally what they were talking about. And then I was asked to basically create this team, this office. And I didn't know, were we doing this because of this one page, which means there's really not sponsorship for it. It's something that ends up in a report. And after a year, people are going to lose interest in it. I've seen many, usually innovative things. If they're going to die, they die within the first 12 to 18 months, I always saw. So I asked for a meeting with the leadership of NASA. I met with Chris Scalise, who is associate administrator at the time. I met with the deputy. I met with the administrator, and I basically said, "Why are we doing this?" And with Chris in particular, he says, "You don't think it's a good idea? This has been your life." I said, "It doesn't matter if I think it's a good. This is my world. But why does Congress? Why do you care? I mean, you're engineers. You're interested in these other things." And I was basically looking to see beyond that report, when people don't pay attention to that, is there really a client, if you will? And I heard Chris, and I heard Charlie Bolden was the administrator, and I heard Mike Gustavich, the chief engineer, and they made wonderful arguments for why this was so important. And I knew that if we did it right, we would be successful. I knew this mattered. And I asked to get Mike, was the chief engineer at the time, to come down to meet with the new team because I knew everyone would be skeptical. This is the kind of thing people don't like to do in project engineering based organizations. And I said, just come down and talk 15, 20 minutes about why this is vital to NASA. He did a beautiful job and people embraced it. So I think the work that you were involved in the human genome, I think people are probably really excited about it. But you have to still fight, I'm sure, for things. I think in the missions, the products, the innovations, the activities, a good idea isn't enough. There has to be people who will support it and fight you reasonably to make it happen. And if there's complacency is the thing always to look for. It's the vampire in the house that will kill anything. Complacency means that when a problem happens, and problems will always happen, you're on your own and you die. So that's the thing that I would say in terms of innovations, Nick, that I think is important. It comes back to the knowledge and the relationships part. The knowledge is, do we have the people? Do we have the technology to be successful in this? And if we do we have the relationships that will support us through the challenges, the resources we need, and when things do not go as planned? And if you don't have both of those, it's going to be really, really difficult to be successful. And so that was it. The other thing that I did, I knew that this was being driven by a special congressional panel. I said to Chris, I need to know why are they saying NASA needs to do this? And I went through the normal systems requesting to speak, and I was told bureaucratically, you can't do it. We have to go through it. So Chris was nice enough. He says, look, they're having one of their meetings at NASA headquarters on this date. At noon, they'll be coming outside the office area to get lunch. Why don't you stand there, go up to the person, introduce, and then ask your question? That's exactly what I did. I saw the head of the committee, and I had Hoffman, this is what I'm doing. Why is a knowledge program so important to Congress for NASA? What does success look like? And he gave me an answer that totally surprised me. Without that, I would have thought we needed to go in a different way. His answer was, I like the things that NASA does at the different centers and at the agency. You do a lot of good knowledge and learning things. But what I don't like is you're completely uncoordinated. You're not integrated. In other words, Houston will do one thing. It doesn't learn from JPL, doesn't learn from God. Learn in silos. And I knew exactly what he was talking about. And from that 10-minute conversation, I knew we didn't need to create something new. We needed to create a new governance way of how we collaborated together. So it changed the whole dynamic. So I knew I had a leadership that was supportive because I heard them verbalize it. I knew one of the ultimate stakeholders, a congressional panel. I knew what they were looking for, and I liked it. And I spent time with the project and engineering community, basically talking about what's the values of this and how we do it. So I think that's what you have to. One part of it is knowledge, the expertise. You get smart people like yourself and the team, but that's not enough. It's the relationships. And so I always look for those kinds of two things. So I have smart, solid people. Place like NASA, places you work, the answer is usually going to be yes, because you have it internally or you have it in industry or you have it in universities. But the other one, which is often more hidden and dangerous, is do I have the relationships to make this mission successful? And you got to watch that and you have to manage that really closely. There are things I asked for deliberately to make sure I had that and that I would have the support for this innovation.
Yeah. So many questions pop up to my head with everything you just said, and presumably there was a form of knowledge management at each one of these centers. And so I guess if I say back to you what I heard, what Congress and leadership at NASA wanted you to do was establish a system for cross pollination across these different centers, so that they would learn together, unite the knowledge in one place, and all kind of like benefit from that,
Right.
together. Um, and so yeah, I mean, something like that, it's not even about the technology, right? It is all about it's about people.
Yeah.
It's everything about, like you said, who do you have available to you, talking to people, understanding requirements, what does it mean to solve that problem, who's going to use it, how are they going to use it, how are they going to consume that information? And so uh, it's fascinating to see that. Um, as recently, you said this was what, like 2010?
That's right. That was the
Yeah.
starting point of it. Yeah.
Interesting that
So,
as recently as that, was just 15 years ago, right?
yeah.
That NASA was saying like, okay, we need to stop working in silos, which I can
So
see
big
that. I
issue.
mean, yeah, totally.
Maybe the
And
biggest challenge for organizations today is, and it's part of our knowledge economy, is that organizations really are blessed with really smart, talented people. In all these organizations, we tend to end up within our communities, right? AI people end up with AI people. Learning people learn with engineer different kinds of engineers, and so we work and we go to parties and we like and we trust each other. Now we have to work with the 90% of the people who are part of different talented areas.
mhm,
And 40 years ago, if I had trouble working with, legal, I had time to work it. It wasn't a big deal. Nowadays, things happen so fast that the head of that AI initiative has to be aware of the legal implication, which has to know about the procurement contract in movies, which has to understand what are the partnering situations, what kind of talent and learning do we. All these are coming together, and we're used to working within our own tribes, and so we have the knowledge there, but we don't always build the teams. I saw in a lot of your background, it's around team
mhm,
capability, team of course, that's so important. One of the things I learned at NASA earlier in my career, I kind of used to believe that if you had 50 people on the team and they were the smartest people and they were the most passionate and most credible at what they're doing, if you throw them together, things will go well. And then I learned, it doesn't work that way. Sometimes, people may be smart about their stuff, but they don't like each other or they don't, all these factors. so that how we learn to work together, how we do what we're doing right now, how do you have conversations so we can understand what we have and how we can get close to what we're doing for is so important. And for thousands of years, we could do that over years. We didn't nowadays things change so quickly. We're talking now for whatever period of time. Once we get it on, something new has happened again.
Mhm.
And so that to me is maybe the biggest challenge of organizations and societies. It's we can find expertise for everything and brilliant people, passionate people, smart people. How do we collaborate towards a common mission, towards the common end? And that's more difficult because we don't know in many cases how to communicate to each other. And one of the things I believe is that the thing that scares people more than anything else, more even than public speaking or death, is other people.
I
So
it
yeah,
Yeah, and how do you like you said, it's yeah, sometimes you throw really smart people into a room and things don't go necessarily as planned. Do you think all these people are just gonna be motivated by being around smart people and they're all gonna get together and get along? And that's part of establishing culture. It's part of people
yes,
management. It's part of, again, as we said, creating a safe space. It's also part of just getting rid of toxic people. Some
yes,
some people you just can't change, and when they are
that's right,
toxic, they can actually spoil the entire lot. And so you've got to understand, and that's one of the things where you just don't know when is the right time to get rid of this person. You try to work with them as much as you
right,
possibly can, and at some point you're like, all right, this is just not working out, and you have to get rid of them for the sake of the rest of the team. And when
that's
you
right,
do that, it's amazing how then the team just kind of like becomes better. It almost heals very quickly
that's right.
because by the time it gets to you, this person is toxic. Those people have been dealing with this for a long time. And they're probably wondering why is this person doing this and why are they still here? So when
Why
you
are they
finally
getting
get
away with it while I'm working so hard and trying to? Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. One of the things NASA's a very good place. I think a lot of projects are good at stories. And when you think of a project, there's a destination. One of my favorite movies is Lord of the Rings, right? And when I think about it logically, it's kind of crazy. You're basically told at the very, very beginning of everything that you're going to do something that will likely kill you, that you're facing dragons and you're doing all these things and you're working with people you don't like and all that kind of stuff. But it makes total sense when we take on a story if it's something we're passionate about, then we it becomes really important. So we commit to it and we want to go in that direction. And I think with the most important, projects, product activities, we create stories that motivate us to move forward. So you're a part of the Human Genome Project. I don't know that much about it, but it turns me on. I have a story in my head of how cool that would be and how cool you are because you're a part of it. And anything that I could do to be a part of it, I would want to be there. And so successful projects and missions, they come from having a story that we get together. This is more important than any of us individually. They're about tapping into knowledge that we have or that we have to find. They're the ability to innovate by learning, because if you keep doing things the same way, you can't get to where you need to go. So all of these are the factors to me that lead to this notion of a smart smart mission. And I think when you're a part of a project, a product, a program that excites people, it's a major fuel accelerant to be able to get it to work.
Oh, it's I one of the posts that I wrote was on leadership storytelling and shaping your narrative. And it's so I lived it through startups because in a startup you don't have a lot. You have an idea that's unproven, untested,
Yeah,
and all you really have is that idea and the story around it and how it'll make the world a better place. And
yeah,
you need to be able to shape it in such a way that people will um reflect, they will um somehow embrace that idea. It'll become a part of them to the point that they'll want to work with you to make it happen. They'll want to fund you. They'll want to open doors for you. And it's all based on this idea and the notion that you're the one that can deliver on that. And
Yes,
so you have to shape that story in such a way that's inspiring. It gets people, and that's part of just leadership, right? I mean, leadership is inspiring people to want to do the things that you're leading them to, not telling them to do it. And and at the same time, that story's got to have components for all the stakeholders because they're not all thinking the same thing and they don't all have the same incentives and so on. So you've got to shape it, and it's not perfect at first, but you shape it over time, and then you realize like, oh, it's missing a key element for this very important stakeholder. I need to add that to the story.
that's right.
And and so yeah, I agree with you. I think at the end of the day, the greatest things that society can accomplish are things that are shaped by a very inspiring story that moves people to want to move mountains to make it happen.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things, I do the navigating the future of work for the I love that of all the things I teach. And I think because basically it's a story. I mean, like, love to have you actually talk to the students, but one of the questions I'd ask you is, what are the stories for where we're going that excites you most? And obviously, I won't do this because this is your podcast, but that to me is fascinating. With all the things that you've done, part of there's so many things out there that are exciting about exploration, about science, about new technologies, about AI, about how long do humans live,
Yeah.
and just get a sense from you as to, hey, these are the things that not only are cool, but they're achievable, and how to go about that. That to me is the story of who we are, and that I sign up for. So if you're
Yeah, I
willing,
mean,
I'd love to have you at Columbia.
oh, I'd love to. I mean, if I were put on the spot to answer that, the easy one for me, there's so many different things, but the easy one, especially with my field, is the effects that AI is going to have on precision medicine, right? Precision medicine for a lot of people, it's synonymous with genomics, but it's not. The heart of it is using all of the available data about an individual, which includes genomics, it includes clinical information, environmental, socioeconomic, their behavior, nutrition, and so on. And how do all these things factor into what their health is going to be and what their potential outcomes are so that you can get ahead of those, prevent them, mitigate them, monitor them, and so on. And, historically, healthcare has been very siloed. You
Yeah,
look at people through a clinical lens or you look at them through a genetic lens. And was part of the Human Genome Project, like you mentioned, that was 25 years ago. We've learned a lot, but we've also learned that genetics, for the most part, is a probabilistic science.
yeah,
You have a risk stratification that says you, Nick and Sina, or you, Ed, have preconditions for X. You may or may not have them. There's a probability. Now, the things that are going to factor in are going to be your age and your healthcare and your access to good nutrition, your environment, what the air you breathe, and those dynamics are so complicated that we haven't really looked at how they interact in a way that gives us a better indication of people's probabilities for certain things. And I
yeah,
think having now these big, massive data sets, the technology, I think healthcare is going to start becoming far more interesting now when we look at how these health determinants, um, how they interplay and how they're connected.
yeah,
Um, but so one thing with NASA, if we step back into that, you mentioned before, like how do you stay adaptive and how do you keep up with the pace of disruption that's happening today, right? I mean, when you and I spoke about this, almost 10 years ago, you mentioned things that blew my mind, right? Things like when NASA innovates, you've got to think about, in terms of decades, not only the components of whatever you're doing. So if we think about the Voyager spacecrafts that were launched in the 70s that are still functioning today, they're in interstellar space, sending signals back. We're course correcting, sending them signals. You've got to think about everything from the technology you're using. Is it still going to be relevant in 20, 30, 40 years? You've got to think about how you manage to course correct with a device that it could take 12 hours or more for the signal just to get there and for it to get back to us to know if the signal even got there in the first place. Um, all the way through just all the possible things that could go wrong, and including, is this the right time to do this? Because if we wait
yeah,
another 5 years, we may invent new technology that'll get us there cheaper and faster. And so at some point, you just have to pull the trigger and be like, we're doing this.
yeah.
And so if you could just share a little bit about the thinking behind all of those factors, and obviously we can't cover them all, but just
Yeah.
It's flabbergasting for me thinking about it from the outside.
Yeah, I mean, so I to do it quick, I think I look to about 6 principles that I learned, at NASA, and this is kind of this notion of the smart mission. I'll give an example, but one is knowledge. You have to stay smart. Knowledge is dynamic. So if you're brilliant today and you stop caring, you'll fall behind. So in addition to knowledge, you need to have a learning. You need to be comfortable with failure. Things aren't working. You need to put aside your ego in terms of learning from others. You need to have a culture that I think embraces. Smart people are annoying because they tell us things we don't want to hear, and the world is annoying because it keeps changing. The world that I grew up with is different today. The music is different. The technologies are different. So having a culture of adaptability becomes important. Team, I mentioned, is vital. Everything is done now in a team. And how do we define the notion of team? Is it just our discipline or just the team we work with? Is it the people who are part of the larger organization who are supporting this? Do we include our clients and politicians who see themselves as part of it? Becomes a very important factor. Collaboration that cuts across these boundaries and silos. How do we collaborate? Do we collaborate truly with openness, open source, open kimono, if you will? Or do we hold certain things back? And then I think that story, that sense of story becomes important. I'll try to make it a quick story. In studying, preparing to write the book, The Smart Mission, NASA's lessons for managing knowledge, people, and projects. One of the examples we came across that I thought was cool was a team, very small team based out of the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And it was March of 2020 at the onset of COVID. And for different reasons, the leadership came up with the notion of, look, we have world-class engineers here. We have our citizens and friends dying in hospitals because of a shortage of ventilators. We should be able to develop a prototype for a ventilator that can be built at any hospital with low cost, off the shelf technology. That was the goal. So they got approval for that. It was going to be a very fast, it was supposed to be 60 days or a very short turnaround mission. If you look at what had to happen, it was interesting. They had really smart engineers, but they didn't have health technologists. They didn't have medical ventilator experts. They didn't have people who knew the nature of a virus or COVID. So they had to develop knowledge by going outside. They went to Huntington Hospital to speak to the head of pulmonology in terms of what he knew about the cases, the causes. They met with nurses. They met with patients. They talked to technicians in the ventilator business. They pulled together expertise based on that good engineers could leverage. They had a principle on that team, try to get it right, which was be comfortable being ignorant until we are not. We will be comfortable being ignorant I never heard that. NASA is a proud organization. People don't like to be ignorant. So I'd ask her, what's this all about? She says, NASA, we can be arrogant. And we couldn't afford arrogance on the time. We needed to learn from others. So he said, look, let's be honest. We don't know about a lot of the things here. Let's be honest when we don't know something. Let's invite people in. Let's listen to them. Let's learn from them. So they created a norm of learning and putting aside where the geniuses. They focused heavily on the team. It was a small team. It was one of the first projects that had to work at a distance. Because you remember during the COVID working from, how do you do that? How do you build trust? And they did different things. They started the practice when they were on Teams or Zoom or whatever they used of keeping their cameras on so that we can see each other. It's not the same as being that they did that. Um, uh, One of the other things they did is at NASA, you'll select characteristics that you want for your team. And then a variety of characters, they wanted innovative people and all that. But two things that they had listed that were interesting. One is they wanted forceful project team members, and they wanted kind, Kind, project team members. The forceful is easy on a project, and I think it's probably true. For people in projects in science tend to be forceful. The kind, what was that about? And what they said is, look, we're doing a fast turnaround, 2 months. We don't have time for drama, but we need to be totally honest that if I'm doing something that doesn't make sense, we want Nick to basically said, hey, Ed, I see what you're doing, but I don't think this will work. But we wanted it done in a way that was supporting the team. So we wanted forceful people and kind people. We wanted the relationship to matter. I talk about the importance of story. How do you build this trust and the sense of collaboration? At the start of each meeting, they would read their mission statement. And I don't have the exact words here, but it's basically we're developing prototypes for off the shelf, low cost ventilators so that any hospital can use that to develop ventilators to basically help their citizens and people deal with COVID. And they would read at the start of each of their meetings, and it would remind you why you're working hard, why you're fighting, why you're working long hours. The story becomes part of this. We're here doing something. So let's get over the individual differences and let's make it work. And then they had what I wrote about it is called global collaboration. I don't mean international, but collaboration is often toughest not with our own team, but as we work with people from different parts of the community, of the pharma community, right? As an example, a key part of ventilators is the regulatory aspect. They brought in two regulatory experts, one from the UK, one from I think, Mount Sinai in the US, who were part of the team immediately. Now, normally, project people do not like regulatory people because they tell you what you can't do. And I've sometimes heard the notion we won't tell them about it till the you know how that goes. But they have the regulatory people immediately so they can say this will work, this will definitely not work. And when they finished this in 37 days,
Wow.
and it was passed at that 37th day by, I think, the regulatory reviewers, partly because they were part of this process. So, the smart mission comes from having knowledgeable people inside, but also outside. You have a team that is committed to the truth and working hard, but also to taking care of each other. You have the acknowledgement that we have to adapt, we have to change. Knowledge is dynamic. The end of today, something's changing. We're to continue moving forward. We can't get complacent. Globally collaborating across the different communities, so we're getting the best out of things. Having a culture that embraces learning and is comfortable with failures and iterates, and we take on the challenges and we keep going. It's like, we keep going no matter what spiders we're dealing with. We keep committed and supporting each other. And this notion of a story, what we're doing matters. And if we get to the point where we don't think it matters, we got to really talk about that. And I think that to me is the no, that's the world we're in right now. It wasn't like that 34 years ago because you had time. You can change your minds. Things didn't change that fast. Nowadays, the technologies, the relationships, the politics, the dynamics, the geo, all these things change. So you have to rely on the people, knowledge, learning, culture, team, story, and collaborating across these lines. That's to me what I spend my time focused on.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It almost sounds like this story deserves almost like a Lockheed Martin Skunk Works version 2.0.
Yeah,
The experience, right? I mean, it sounds like what you guys succeeded in what, 32 days, you said?
37. They got it done in.
37 days. Yeah, I mean, when you're approaching it with smart people that tend to rub each other, you have to create the
Yes,
environment, the culture, the story, the mission, all of it needs to align. You've got to create relatively emotionally intelligent people that are kind to each
yes.
other, while at the same time respectfully challenging each other to become better. And all of that in a way that you're taking these people into a place where now, yes, you're very smart, but you're going to be ignorant for a very long time before you
Yeah,
figure this
right.
out. Yeah, and
I
then,
mean, I'm
to
talking to you with all the background you have. You know things I don't have knowledge, and I'm comfortable with that. And what I saw in terms of my career at NASA, usually the thing that would hurt a career or end a career, um, it was often people who were really brilliant, but they didn't know or they didn't want to work with others. They almost thought, and they may have grown up at a time where you hoard knowledge for yourself.
Mhm.
You establish the background of, "Hey, I am the genius in this area, and I know it all." And in always in a place like NASA, that's a kiss of death because no one individual, no one team has all the answers. You're working with many from industry, large organizations, startups. You're working with science in different communities, different fields of engineering, different aspects of management. So, I mean, there's so many factors that the ability to build relationships of trust and argument. The best teams, they argue. They got that out there on the table, but they supported each other, at the end of the day to start the next day to keep moving forward. So again, I think at the very high level, the big challenges of the day are assembling, creating, sharing the knowledge, the expertise that we get from people and technology, and doing it in a way that the relationships help us work effectively and ethically, so that we do cool things. It would have been a great story if in Frankenstein they created life, but they did it in a way that it was able to move forward as opposed to this tale of horror.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge of how do we assemble our knowledge and how do we work really effectively together.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Presumably, all of this that we're talking about and more is what you've rolled into this class that you're teaching at Columbia.
Yes, yeah. One of the things I do, and again, I'm going to outbite you to talk.
Happy
So
to.
it was an interesting. The Navigating the Future of Work course was a course that came from my students. Been teaching a couple of courses, one on bringing ideas to organizations and another on knowledge, foundations of knowledge in the current environment. And one of the things the students several years back started saying, we have all this knowledge of digital and data and, all these different factors, but we see this new world changing. How do we prepare ourselves for it? Can you do something on future work? And so that was the notion. And I really think what you want to do, kind of what you do with your podcast, is let's get different people. And so I'll bring a woman, a leader of a major bank in Australia, Melbourne, who will come and she talks about her own journey of leadership and how do you bring about change in a 100-year-old firm. I'll bring a technologist who's doing things on brain waves with the army in terms of being able to indicate when people are starting to lose their focus and his own personal story, of that. And so we'll bring in different people who are doing successful things like yourself. And I will ask them to just talk 30 minutes, 45 minutes about what they've done, what they're doing, how the students interact. And at the end of this is a 5 day, this is most of my courses are virtual, but this one's on site, 5 straight days. At the end of that, you have a kind of cornucopia of different areas of expertise, all successful people, all doing cool things, kind of leveraging different things. And to me, the future of work, you can't predict the future, but you can create the capabilities in terms of how you prepare yourself to respond and move forward. That's what the course tries to do.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I would. I'd love to visit. I'd love to be a fly in the wall and just hear all these stories. Um,
You're going to get the invite. So, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So I know where you've been so generous with your time. This has been fascinating for me. Like I said, this has been insight that I've been waiting 10 years to get and ask you these questions. And I could go on forever. I mean, it's just I'm fascinated by it. I've been a massive fan of just space exploration and the work that NASA's been doing. I can't help it, but it's when I talk to people about true innovation, uh, to me, NASA is the first word, the first organization that comes to mind. It's just the ability that the organization has had to explore the universe and give us a better sense of ourselves and open our eyes to what's around us, what's beyond the stars, and how we fit into the cosmos. I think it's just one of the most extraordinary accomplishments of humankind. And It's humbling, it's terrifying, but I wouldn't have it any other way. And so, thank you for all the work that you did at NASA and for the extraordinary work that so many other scientists before and today are doing there. And honestly, when I look at the news every day, I'm always hoping there's going to be a new release, news post, or a photograph coming from NASA that's going to shed a little bit more insight into what our place is in the cosmos. So, um, with all that, I guess just one final question, if I could ask you, for future space exploration experts and potential people that want to work in space exploration,
Yeah.
astrophotography, NASA, just given where we are today, where technology is today, what advice would you give to somebody who's, say, in high school or college thinking, like, you know what? Ed sounds like a really, really smart and cool guy. I would love to work with more people like that. How do I end up in NASA? What do I study? What do I do? Where is this field going?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of entry. I get that question a lot. I've spoken to a lot of, not only high school, but elementary school. They get so excited. One of the things I say, obviously, study. You're in school, find out what you enjoy. My background was not math. I came down with the flu, missed 2 weeks of fractions in certain grade, and never really caught up in math. So I didn't get into NASA as an engineer or a technologist. I got in there as a psychologist, the human aspects. So one of the things I say to people is, these kind of complex projects that we've been a part of, they require people not only who know math, who know engineering, who know computer technology, but they also need people who know communications and marketing and who knew visualization capabilities and who learn the learning. So one of the things I would say is study and find out what you're really interested in. What can you get to the point where you want to get more and more capable so that you can offer great, deep expertise to an organization? Obviously, if you're good at math, you're good at technology, if you're good at the engineering foundation or science, then that fits in naturally. But even if you're into business or accounting or innovation in different ways, you can leverage that. So I would get good in high school of studying and demonstrate the ability to do well in school. You don't have to do great, but I think doing well. And then I would reach out. I'd look at the colleges and what schools work with, if it's specifically NASA, what schools work with NASA. There are certain universities that do a lot of work with NASA so that when you go there, you link up with a professor and you get an internship. I got to NASA because of an internship from Columbia. I was studying under Warner Burke. He got me into doing competency leadership work in the early 80s and spent the next 33 years there. So take the time to understand what you're good at, what interests you, study it, do well in it, and then as you think about next stages, look for the relationships. You're going to go to college, look for a school with a professor or two that has connections to NASA and look to get internships to get in there. But if you want it, you'll get it, is truthfully is my view. And it's getting to that point where you have that kind of clarity. So many different steps, but that's what I'd recommend.
That's fascinating. Well, I'll polish up my resume, put in a good word for me.
Anytime. Absolutely.
Uh, no, but thank you so much, Ed. This has been a conversation for me personally. It's been 10 years in the making. It's a privilege to talk to you and to learn more about your experience.
Thank you very much, Nick. I look forward to seeing it. And thanks for staying connected. This has been a lot of fun.
That was Ed Hoffman. Now, unnatural signals.
What this episode gives us is a clear look at how innovation survives in environments where failure is simply not an option. First, culture isn't a soft layer, it's infrastructure. At NASA, trust, shared principles, and how people are allowed to speak up determine which ideas even get a chance to exist. Culture becomes a system that quietly selects what survives. Second, storytelling isn't fluff, it's alignment. When teams are distributed, specialized, and operating far into the future, shared narratives replace rulebooks. They allow people to make good decisions without needing permission at every step. Third, progress depends on tension. The constant push and pull between science, engineering, and management isn't a bug, it's the engine. Healthy organizations don't eliminate disagreement, they design for it, and they teach people how to argue well. What Ed shows us is that the same instincts that move humanity into space are the ones that allow ideas to survive complexity here on Earth.
Thanks for listening to Unnatural Selection. If you enjoyed the episode, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone shaping the future. Explore more at unnaturalselection.net and connect with us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Until next time, keep evolving.